Imagine stepping into the Amazon for a simple 2-hour walk, only to vanish into a rainforest where losing the trail means losing your life. In May 2002, two American travelers followed a marked path near a remote Brazilian guest house, carrying only light supplies and full confidence. But one mistranslated word led them off course and into a vast green maze, turning their short hike into a terrifying fight for survival. What brought them there was an impulse. It was a dream, years in the making. For 23-year-old David Baer, a quiet economics student, the Amazon trip had been his long-term project, something he'd saved for dollar by dollar while working at a video rental shop. It was meant to be the adventure he had planned with 21-year-old Crystal Ramsey ever since they met in 1998. Crystal was the opposite of David in almost every way: bold, fearless, and obsessed with large predators. While studying engineering, she found her passion working with big cats, lions, tigers, cougars. Her calmness around danger fascinated him, and their shared love of wildlife sparked the idea of an Amazon expedition. Even after their relationship ended due to distance, Crystal traveling to South Africa to work with lions, David staying in the U.S., the promise of this trip survived. For David, the journey became more than travel. He hoped the experience would bring them close again, but he didn't know that Crystal was quietly battling severe depression and relying on strong antidepressants. She never mentioned it, and that omission added an invisible risk to a journey already filled with unknowns. On May 24, 2002, after days of travel through São Paulo and Manaus, they reached the Amazonia Youth Hostel, a small, isolated lodge pressed up against the endless rainforest. The hostess, a Brazilian woman named Neila Maldonado, spoke very limited English. To explain the surroundings, she sketched a simple map on paper and pointed out a short loop trail marked with white arrows. The White Trail, she called it. It sounded straightforward. It wasn't. She explained that the trail started behind the kitchen, was marked by white arrows painted on the trees, and formed a loop that led to the river and back. But hidden in her explanation was a critical mistranslation. Maldonado used the Portuguese word igarape, which she rendered in English as river. In reality, an igarape in the local dialect refers to a narrow jungle creek or a swampy offshoot, not a major river with clear features. Dave and Crystal imagined something far more obvious: a broad waterway, maybe even a dock or a small settlement. This misunderstanding would become the foundation for the ordeal ahead. 4 days later, on the morning of May 28th, they packed for what they believed would be a short hike. They carried only the essentials: snacks, 3 liters of water, insect repellent, a Swiss Army knife, and a tiny compass attached to Dave's watch. It was the kind of gear suited for a casual morning walk, not a survival expedition. Confident they would be back for lunch, they set out under clear skies, excited that their long-awaited adventure was finally underway. Leaving the hostel meant stepping out of safety and into one of the most complex environments on Earth. Nearly 4 million square miles of rainforest where the canopy blocks the sun. Visibility shrinks to a few yards, and every direction can appear identical. Still, at 10 a.m., Dave and Crystal started along the White Trail. It was wide, easy to pick out, and, just as promised, marked with white chalk arrows. For 2 hours, everything went smoothly. They ventured deeper into the jungle, stopping often to take photos, completely unaware that they were walking toward disaster. Around midday, they made a fateful error. Somewhere off to their right, they heard birds calling. Close, they thought, maybe 100 feet away. Moments later came another sound: rushing water. Their minds immediately connected the noise to what they'd been told. The trail was supposed to lead them to a river, so the sound of falling water must have been part of that route. Convinced they were close to their intended destination, they stepped off the marked path to investigate. The moment they left the trail, their pace slowed to a crawl. Thick vines snagged their clothes. Fallen trunks blocked their way. After pushing through the undergrowth for about half an hour without reaching the source of the sound, they decided to turn back. But when they tried to retrace their steps, the forest had already swallowed the trail. There were no arrows, no opening in the vegetation, no sign of a path in any direction. In the Amazon, where dense foliage limits sightlines to mere feet, the human sense of orientation collapses. Every angle looks like the last. Every tree looks the same. Dave turned to the only tool they had for navigation, a tiny compass attached to his watch. It showed north, but the reading offered little help. In the Amazon, you can't walk in a straight line. Dense roots, tangled vines, fallen trunks, and undergrowth constantly force you to veer off course. A compass becomes nearly useless when you have no idea at what point you left the trail or how far you've drifted from your original line of travel. By about 2 p.m., after nearly 4 hours of trying to orient themselves, they reached their first major obstacle, a wide, swampy floodplain, roughly 160 feet across. The still water was hidden beneath a blanket of green duckweed, with rotted, waterlogged trunks jutting out like black pillars. For Dave, this sight confirmed what he already believed. In his mind, the stagnant backwater matched the hostel owner's clumsy English description of the river Igarapé. It became a mental anchor, proof, he thought, that they were still on the intended route. Convinced they were close to the river, they stepped straight into the murky water, wading through the warm, knee-deep muck. On the opposite side, they found a path, but it was drastically different from the white trail they'd been following. This one was barely 2 feet wide, more like an animal track than a hiking route. It forced them to walk single file, constantly ducking under branches and pushing aside brush. One crucial detail escaped their attention. No white chalk marks on any tree. But their hope overwhelmed their reasoning, and they pressed on. 2 hours later, around 4 p.m., the animal trail ended abruptly at the fallen trunk of a gigantic tree. Dave climbed up to survey the landscape. What he saw ended any illusion they had left. Nothing but dense green walls. No continuation of the trail. No open space. No direction that looked more promising than another. When he climbed back down to Crystal, both of them understood the truth. They had no idea where they were. Lost somewhere in a rainforest the size of an entire continent, without a map, without a proper compass, and without a way to call for help. Their planned 2-hour outing had become a fight for survival. As the light faded, the forest changed character. The calls of daytime birds and insects fell silent, replaced by the echoing voices of nocturnal creatures, a chorus they had never heard before. Conditions worsened quickly. The temperature hovered around 86 degrees Fahrenheit, but humidity had risen to 88%. In these conditions, sweat stops evaporating. Even standing still can lead to overheating. Dave tried to keep their spirits up. They settled in beneath the massive roots of a large tree, intending to stay awake and talk through the night for comfort. Their only real protection, mosquito repellent, worked for a while, but once it evaporated, swarms of insects descended relentlessly, biting any exposed skin. And then came the total darkness. In the lower layers of the Amazon, without moonlight, visibility collapses entirely. You can't see your own hand in front of your face. The combination of pitch-black surroundings, constant insect attacks, crushing humidity, and an alien nighttime soundscape created their first severe psychological ordeal. Their plan to pass the night talking fell apart. All their strength went into coping with the overwhelming environment. By the morning of May 29th, their second day, dehydration became their primary threat. By midday, The last of their bottled water was gone. They had no choice but to drink from jungle streams. They tried filtering the cloudy, foul-tasting water through bits of cloth, which removed only visible debris. What it couldn't remove were the microbes and parasites common in Amazon waters, organisms capable of causing debilitating or even fatal illness. Their food was also nearly gone. Under mounting physical strain and mental stress, Dave insisted on using a structured method to search for an exit. He began applying a strategy called expanding squares. Using the compass, he set a direction and walked for 5 minutes. Then they turned and walked 10, then 15. The idea was to sweep the area systematically, increasing the chance of intersecting a larger trail or any man-made landmark. But the method soon caused friction. To Crystal, exhausted, dehydrated, and emotionally unraveling, the idea of walking in widening loops felt meaningless and wasteful. She believed they should choose a single direction and commit to it, trusting that persistence would eventually lead somewhere. This was the first major clash of their survival strategies. Dave's rational but exhausting system versus Crystal's instinctive, linear push into the unknown. By the end of the second day, it was obvious that Dave's navigation method wasn't producing results. Every square they walked brought them back to identical scenery, feeding the most demoralizing realization of all, that the forest around them felt endless, uniform, and impossible to interpret. On May 30th, their third day lost, they switched tactics. After reviewing the past 48 hours, it was clear that searching in expanding squares wasted too much time and energy in dense jungle. They adopted a simpler plan: push strictly southeast using the compass. To avoid mental burnout, they created a rotation system in which the person leading, responsible for direction and clearing the path, switched every 2 hours, allowing the follower to conserve mental strength. Hydration became an improvised affair. The only available water came from forest streams, which they strained through a piece of Crystal's bra. This crude filter removed large debris, but offered no protection against bacteria or parasites lurking in Amazon waterways. Their food supply, already minimal, had dwindled to almost nothing. That evening, they focused on building a more stable shelter. While gathering palm fronds, Crystal motivated Dave by telling him she'd give him a kiss for every branch he brought after they were rescued. The promise, tied to hope for the future, worked. Dave returned with 47 large fronds, enough to assemble a cone-shaped shelter. By the close of day 3, their behavior had become organized. A consistent walking strategy, a makeshift water filtration method, and a proper sleeping structure. From the outside, it might have looked like successful adaptation. But on the night of May 30th to 31st, everything fell apart. Temperatures dropped unexpectedly, and swarms of mosquitoes made rest impossible. A random observation saved them temporarily. Dave noticed that mosquitoes hadn't bitten the parts of his skin coated with mud earlier in the day. Acting on this insight, they dug a 3-foot pit and smeared themselves with mud from a nearby stream, covering themselves completely. It was unthinkable in normal circumstances, but it worked. The mud formed a protective layer that kept the insects away. For the first time in 3 days, they managed to sleep. Then, around midnight, their solution turned into a deadly trap. A heavy tropical downpour began, intensifying quickly. Their mud pit started collecting rainwater. By 1 a.m., water pooled at their feet. By 2 a.m., it had risen to their chins. In pitch darkness, under torrential rain, they scrambled out to avoid drowning. They huddled at the base of a massive tree for shelter, illuminated only by occasional lightning flashes. Fallen branches crashed around them. Their soaked clothing and the dropping temperature brought on rapid hypothermia, signaled by uncontrollable shivering. Their only defense was body heat, so they clung to each other and waited for daylight. When morning came on May 31st, the physical nightmare was replaced by a psychological one. The cold, the terror of the storm, and severe exhaustion had broken something inside Crystal. Dave noticed immediately. She was emotionally blank, moving like a robot, stripped of will or reaction. What he didn't know was that her antidepressants had now been absent for more than 3 days. The shock of withdrawal, mixed with clinical depression and trauma, triggered a complete psychological collapse. As they prepared to continue, Crystal gave a stark ultimatum. "I can't go through another night like that. We have to get out today, or I won't make it." She said it without emotion, making the statement feel less like fear and more like a fact. Dave realized with dread that he was losing his only partner to despair. Her ultimatum added a new layer to their survival: a timer. He wasn't just fighting the forest anymore. He was fighting Crystal's fading will to live. On June 1st, they pressed on. Unexpectedly, the forest opened up, revealing a sandy clearing. After 4 days of staring at walls of vegetation just feet from their faces, the sight of open sky, sunlight, and dry air felt miraculous. For a moment, the suffocating sense of entrapment lifted, but the hope was short-lived. In the surrounding trees, they spotted harpy eagles, massive raptors that only nest in the most untouched, isolated parts of the rainforest. Their presence confirmed a chilling truth. They were deeper in the Amazon than ever. That afternoon, Dave's mental state began to crumble. He caught a fly and methodically tore off its wings and legs while sitting in the sand. In survival psychology, this behavior signals displacement, projecting helplessness onto something small and controllable. It was a sign that he too was nearing collapse, accepting the likelihood of death. By the end of day 5, both of them were physically and mentally shattered. Continuing felt futile. In this state, Dave proposed a final plan. They would set a deadline. If by 6 p.m. the next day they hadn't found an escape, they would stop fighting for survival. Crystal agreed immediately, showing how far gone she was. They had one remaining day, either to be saved or to surrender. For the first time in his life, Dave, an unwavering atheist, found himself speaking to God. It wasn't a formal prayer, but a desperate bargain born from complete loss of control. He promised to believe if they survived and received some kind of sign. But his important decision that morning wasn't spiritual. It was human. He insisted they must find water and wash themselves before the deadline. Covered in mud and filth, he felt they could not meet the end as broken, hunted creatures. They needed to preserve their dignity. In a strange way, this final ritual gave them something they had been missing: purpose. Their mission was no longer escape. It was to reclaim a sense of humanity in the face of death. On June 6th, their 6th day lost, Dave woke first and evaluated their condition. The signs of collapse were undeniable. Crystal had become frighteningly thin, her legs covered in gashes from thorn-covered plants. Every movement cost her enormous effort. Dave himself felt the unmistakable symptoms of severe exhaustion. For 4 days, they had eaten virtually nothing, surviving only on a few unknown berries. By their estimate, they had taken in no more than 150 calories over the course of 6 days. Their bodies had shifted into full catabolism, cannibalizing their own muscles just to keep their organs functioning. By midday, their fears were confirmed. Crystal could only manage a few steps at a time before needing to stop. Her physical weakness, now compounded by antidepressant withdrawal and deep depression, made forward progress almost impossible. Dave realized that by nightfall, they would likely have no strength left. Tomorrow, movement might be physically impossible. Then, around 2 p.m., they heard something promising: water. But it wasn't the gentle trickle of a small creek. The sound was louder, layered, almost echoing. Dave seized on the noise as their chance to carry out the decision they'd made that morning, to wash themselves before facing whatever came next. Clinging to roots and vines, they slowly descended the slope toward the sound. What unfolded below them was not a stream, but a flooded forest, an igapo. Trees rose out of a vast sheet of water like pillars in a submerged cathedral. Dave entered first. The cool water brought instant relief after days of suffocating heat. The buoyancy eased the pressure on his cut, swollen legs. Crystal joined him, and together they adopted a new tactic: swimming and drifting, gripping roots and tree trunks to guide themselves. Around 4 p.m., a new sound broke through the stillness: the rumble of an engine. A small airplane skimmed low above the canopy. They were invisible under the dense green cover, but the meaning was unmistakable to Dave. Someone was searching for them, and the only people who could have arranged such a search were his parents. The realization that help had crossed continents to find them lit a spark of hope he thought was long extinguished. By 6 p.m., the deadline they had set for life or death, the flooded forest opened onto a broad river nearly 260 feet wide. As they emerged into the open, Crystal suddenly stopped, staring ahead with new intensity. "Is that real? Do you see people?" she whispered. Dave narrowed his eyes. 2 dark shapes were moving along the bend of the river, canoes. Their voices were barely audible from hunger, but desperation gave them strength. They shouted. The canoes turned and picked up speed. Adenolson, a local hunter, was returning from a fishing trip with his cousin Guido. Earlier that morning, he had heard a message over the radio from the hostel owner: "If you find 2 lost Americans, treat them as family." When a search plane passed low overhead at noon, he realized the foreigners were probably close. He changed course and headed toward the sound. The wide river made the approach slow, each second feeling like an hour. Dave and Crystal paddled with their arms, using their last scraps of energy to move closer. When the canoe reached them, Adenolson extended his hand. Dave grasped it and felt, for the first time in 6 days, the firm, reassuring grip of another human being. They were hauled into the boat, and once on board, their bodies trembled uncontrollably, a release of 6 days of terror, hunger, and strain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, their 6 days of survival came to an end. This time, not in death, but in rescue. The villagers of Alto Alegre welcomed them with open arms. Despite their poverty, they offered everything they could: clean clothes, hot meals, medicine for their wounds. Dave and Crystal were placed in a school building that had been converted into a makeshift infirmary. Local women stayed with them through the night, offering sweet tea and soup to rebuild their strength. 2 days later, they were transported to a hospital in the city of Maués. The medical staff was astonished at how well they had endured the ordeal. Though both were severely underweight and covered with insect bites and cuts, neither had contracted tropical disease or suffered frostbite. From the hospital, Dave called his parents. For the first time in his life, he told them, "I love you." They remained in Brazil until mid-July. Before leaving, Dave insisted they return to Alto Alegre with gifts for the people who saved their lives. They brought clothing, medicine, and toys for the village children. The townspeople celebrated with music, dancing, and heartfelt gratitude. A final chapter in a story that had begun with despair, but ended with kindness. The greatest changes awaited Dave after he returned home. The ordeal reshaped his priorities completely. He abandoned his economics career and became a high school science teacher. He built an eco-friendly house powered by solar and geothermal energy and started a fundraising campaign to protect jaguars in Bolivia, an homage to Crystal's passion for big cats. But one fixation remained. Dave believed their survival had been a sign that he and Crystal were destined to be together. For a decade, this hope kept him from forming relationships. Only in 2012 did he accept that their lives had separated for good. Crystal settled in Southern California and continued volunteering for a Bolivian wildlife organization, still working with large predators. Yet the jungle left lasting scars. Her depression deepened, requiring long-term therapy. Dave and Crystal's ordeal is more than a survival story. It's a reminder of how fragile the line is between adventure and catastrophe, and how the kindness of strangers can change everything. If you found their journey compelling, make sure to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that stay with you long after they're over. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.